Palo Alto Networks firewall, back to the user ID with some configuration now. So now we're going to get down into those details, take a look at some of the users and the things and the servers and, well, the fun stuff. So kind of jumping into our idea about using users, kind of a fun thing to say over and over again. But anyway, getting into the user ID concept and configuration. Now, I will point out on here, I'm getting onto a live production server, so one of my consulting clients who I got permission from. And so there will be a number of things grayed out time and time again, so to kind of protect the innocent. But I wanted to get into really the concept of showing a configured environment and something that really was a little bit more real for all the things we get into. Okay? So as I get in, when I start looking at stuff and going into it, all of my configuration to begin with will be on the device tab, and we're going to be starting to look at things like under the server profiles, and LDAP is honestly where I'm going to get started. So when I go ahead and configure things in here, and I can pick one for where it is that I'm going and how it is that I'm set up for it, the click on add, of course, will bring me up a brand new box to put the information in there. But figured it'd be more fun to have the stuff show up with something populated that looks a little bit more, well, for real, because it actually is. Okay, so name it whatever you want. That's kind of the easy part. Put our servers over here. You can name them and then give it the IP address and then the port number. Typical LDAP port number, of course, is 389, but in case yours is something different, change all that information that you have. You will want to put the domain name because it's going to be part of your Active Directory setup, so you will need that information in there. When we do the drop-down boxes for stuff, I can do an Active Directory, which is probably what most people will be doing, or I can do an eDirectory or Sun servers or other, which is more of the generic LDAP setup. Right? When I get to it and when I start looking at things and seeing what I have go on, okay, all of my binding information, so my base bind is going to be the OU information that we have here. So the domain controller information, I may have some more specific OUs if I'm getting down to that, but that's my starting point for where in my Active Directory hierarchy or in the X.509 hierarchy that I'm looking for everything. My bind DN or distinguished name is going to be the user that I'm actually going to be logging in as to do everything. And then, of course, the password that goes along with that. So this is going to be my setup for where I'm going to be going for things. In terms of what I have right here, I'm simply going to put them in the order that I want to try to connect to them. I would probably put something that's either the best server or fastest server first, or possibly the least used, depending on how many domain controllers you have and what the layout is. You may need to consult, I know this is kind of harsh, but you might need to consult with your Windows server admins to figure out what the best choices are going to be, where those domain controllers happen to be at, and what the best results are going to be. Because it is a lot in the timing of where we're going to be going. Remember, we're looking at logging information on here. Okay, so I can go ahead and cancel this, move things on. Again, other things are going to be exactly the same way if I have other information or multiple servers that I want to be getting into or looking at on there. So that's going to be kind of my starting point for it. Then what I want to do is actually look up here, so still in the device profiles, at user identification. Okay, so my user identification information is going to kind of go into more of the detail of what I'm looking for, how often I'm going to be looking for it, things along those lines. So a lot of it's checkboxes like enable security log, am I going to be looking for that? How frequent am I going to be looking at it? Enable this session from the firewall to the domain controllers. So kind of check on these things. I could also enable or disable probing. My personal choice, I would not enable this just from the frequency of traffic and the what I deem as obnoxious behavior because I don't like NetBIOS, but that's my personal opinion. In this particular case, the client has gone ahead and enabled it. They use it as part of adding to that user to IP mapping portion. As long as it works for you, perfectly fine. It is an available tool to use, so that's all good stuff. And of course, timeouts for it and everything else. If we needed to do NTLM, so some of the old school Windows NT domain stuff, we could do that as well. Shows my servers and my status down here. So each of them that we have, each of the domain controllers that were configured, we've got that. I can always add new ones or discover with NBT, the NetBIOS over TCP/IP. So that gives my idea as far as what my mapping portion is going to be. If I have any user ID agents on here, okay, so this particular one, we do have one Active Directory agent, so we do need to configure all of them so that we know who's going to be talking to us, how the information is going to be passed along. Name is simple, whatever we want to do, and the IP address that we're going to be communicating with and the port number. Like we said in the concept nugget, the default port for the agent communication is TCP 5007. So this is just leaving to the default, nothing, I guess, out of the ordinary on here, but they have to be registered for it in order to work. Terminal servers agents, in this case there are no terminal servers, either the Citrix or the Microsoft, so nothing to particularly worry about. Group mappings. This is where we start to kind of build things out that we would see or be able to use in our security profiles. Right? So AD group mapping, just taking a look at it, really fairly simple on there, tells me the username that I'm going in with, and the group include list is going to be kind of the important part, and I can always drill down on here and look and see all of the things that were learned. In this case, it's doing the entire organization that we're actually looking at on there. Go ahead and cancel. I'm not gonna change anything for this. But that kind of gives you an idea as to where we start setting things up or how we can start delineating them. If I was doing Captive Portal, that would all be configured right here. It is enabled. It may or may not be something that actually has to be done. Okay, that's for later profile settings to enable the Captive Portal or not. But we do choose at the device level to actually enable that in there. So all of these things kind of configured, my user identification portion along with my server profiles for LDAP tells me exactly what I'm going to have to be doing or what I'm going to be seeing on there. Now, if we go into policies, and again, we'll have some things grayed out in here, but security policies that we have. So here's one that will actually have some of the groups in there. And simply going to be, just the name of it, permit by users. I have the standard stuff that I would for any mention of security policy. So I have the source zone. It's going to be any IP address. Don't care about that, but I'm going to further limit it by users. And here where I can get into my group information, which is going to be specific to these particular groups. And again, I guess my apologies that they're grayed out just to kind of keep things simple on there. But 2 specific groups of users based on Active Directory profiles. So as everything gets mapped, as we look at what groups a user belongs to, whether it be user Bob or Sue or Alice or Phil or whatever, we can go through here and determine who is or who is not going to be allowed, go back to source, regardless of the IP address. Because it looks like I'm permitting every IP address, which I am, just next with the constraint of users that are in these particular groups. And so that's the way that we can bind all of this together or give us more flexible controls within our policies. Now, same type of thing when we go into monitoring. So when I start looking at monitors, see, I don't know if they're doing any URL filtering or not. Okay, nothing from, there are some from a log standpoint. So when we see things in here, general stuff as far as either what's blocked or alert information, okay, see the actions down the side. Specifically, some of them list a username to it. Okay? So depending on the method that we got the HTTP stuff or what we've learned in there, where stuff is coming from, what we have chosen to log, that information could be in there. So I could go ahead and pull a report on any of the information based on each user that I wanted to look at. This is good for an HR standpoint. It's good from an overall security standpoint. It's so you and I can go and look and see are our policies hitting the way that we want them to. And that's always a big thing. Remember, all these logs are only as good as what we look at. So if they just sit here and don't do anything, well, then it really doesn't help me any. Actually, threat log won't have anything to it. Traffic log, on the other hand, I can have user information. So again, same thing here as far as what I'm going to be logging or how I'm going to be logging it. And then I can run reports on it. I can see what's going on. I can look for trends. I can do good security engineering in terms of observing what's happening and making any changes that are necessary beyond that. So that's kind of the idea of how we implement the user ID part. So I need to have my LDAP server, I need to check what I'm doing with the user ID information, so all under device, and then I implement them in the profiles. So another thing that we can do is really going to be through our SSH setup. We've got a couple of show commands on here that'll give us some additional information on here, okay, such as show user IDs. I'm going to be very specific about that. All right. So hit enter, watch for information, okay, and it starts to show us all of the stuff that it happens to learn. Now, a lot of information, and again, I'm going to go through and gray lots of this out, so not quite as much fun as it could be, but it gives us lots of stuff that's on there. The other thing that we have that can be useful is show user IP user mapping, and just say all. And this will start to give us all of the IP addresses and where they're from, how I learned it, okay, so any of that information, what virtual system and all that jazz. So this gives us a lot of feedback that we can go through and then look at our logging information for and see what's going to be going on. So we've seen a lot of the configuration on here for getting user ID stuff, okay, so as far as setting it up from our server standpoint, into my ID, and that of course goes into my policies. Okay, we also saw the information from a logging standpoint as well as from, we'll just call it SSH, but my CLI standpoint, some of the show commands that we can do and look at it and really kind of, I guess, verify what it is we're learning or what kind of information that we're having. So lots of stuff around a user ID. Again, I'll apologize for the fact that a lot of the information was grayed out, but I think that this was a lot more valuable in terms of seeing a functional production system rather than just going through the, hey, here's a blank screen and we can play with it in the lab kind of deal. Now, granted, that's what you and I are going to sit and do, is kind of play around with that in the lab and make sure that we understand the screens and see what's going on. But, like I said, I just wanted to kind of flesh out more of the information on there and let you see what's truly happening. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.